The great marketing teams are the ones where the marketing leader is comfortable enough with their own skin that they say, I am great at this, and I'm going to hire somebody better than me in this, and this area.
A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Customer experience is anything that directly touches the customer, everything that the customer sees. Those are the words and ideas of Dave Knox, our guest on this episode of the B2B Growth Show. My name is Ethan Beute. I host the CX series here on the show. Dave is classically trained in branding and marketing and brings a lot of expertise in that area. And he's currently operating primarily with fast growth companies and venture capital. So we have a great conversation for you. You are going to learn the pros and cons of different ways to fund a company. You are going to learn about specific improvements that you can make to your customer experience, especially in a high growth environment. And you're going to get specific marketing mistakes that he sees too many companies making. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, welcome back to the Customer Experience Podcast. You're going to love this episode. Our guest works at the intersection of brands and technology with a focus on startups, seed funding, and venture capital. He's currently a strategic advisor at Predicting the Turn. He's also a podcast host of the same name, Predicting the Turn. He's a managing partner at Vine Street Ventures, co-founder at The Brandery, which is a tech accelerator. I look forward to learning a little bit more about that. And also interesting here is that he spent 7 years as CMO at Rockfish. This is a company that's owned by WPP, formerly known as a global advertising and PR agency, but now they call themselves a creative transformation agency. I can see that becoming a conversation theme here today. And so our guest today, Dave Knox, welcome to the Customer Experience Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think there's obviously a lot going on with brands, technology, disruption, innovation, and you're kind of in an interesting seat around all of that, especially over the past decade. So I look forward to getting into it, but I want to start where I always start, which is your definition or your thoughts on customer experience.
Yeah. So customer experience, being a brand guy by training, I started my career at Procter & Gamble back in the day. And I think of customer experience as being everything that's the front of the house, anything that touches that consumer and can influence how they think about your company, your brand, your business. So that's everything from the essence of the brand design to marketing, to sales, to how you show up at retail. That customer experience is every single one of those touch points rolled together.
That's awesome. You've given me language that I haven't heard on this question before, and I've asked it dozens of times. It's this clear delineation between front of house and back of house. Back of house being, of course, the things that most people don't see, and front of house being, to your point, everything that everyone experiences. So I love that. So going to your branding background, I've had a couple branding experts on the show, and I'd put you probably adjacent to, if not in that category. I'll let you decide how you feel about that. But there seems to be a fair amount of overlap from time to time in talking about customer experience and brand experience or branding. What do you see the relationship there as being, and where are they similar? Where are they different? Do you have a line between those two, or do you see them as approximately synonymous?
Yeah, I think frankly they're similar in their, if not completely overlapping. Customer experience is definitely an emerging field that the language has really only come about, I'd say, in the last decade. You've seen it in the public eye. It wasn't something that when we were getting the training and branding back in the day was ever really talked about as its own thing. It was just the essence of one of the things that you had to do. But with the rise of B2B marketing and the rise of direct-to-consumer efforts, I think that's what's given rise to the language of customer experience. But if you're not doing branding the right way, if you're not thinking about it as part of your core efforts there.
What is the essence of good branding to you? What is its outcome? If someone is committed to brand building, what are the obvious consequences of that?
Yeah. So the essence of, I think, what makes great branding is evoking emotion, because that's what a brand comes down to. Is it sparking something in a person when they see what you are, hear what you are? When they hear your brand, do they know something? And does it evoke an emotion with it? And there's a wide range of what that emotion can be, but great branding has thought about that, has dictated it, and it's been planned across the board. And it's where it goes back to it's being across every touch point. Think about a company like Zappos. You can think a lot of things with it, but essence, it's going to be a great experience. That's probably what you evoke and that feeling of happiness that goes into it.
Love it. The feeling part of it is often something that someone will offer in the definition of customer experience. And so to wrap both of those together, they are very, very overlapping. This is just a personal curiosity for me. I mean, coming up in P&G, I imagine that you got essentially the equivalent of an MBA in your onboarding and training. What was that experience like for you, and how did that shape your career?
Yeah, it's funny you use those words of like an MBA, because for me, that's exactly what it was. P&G, especially in brand management, is kind of a unique place in that probably about 90 to 95% of my colleagues as assistant brand managers were coming from an MBA program and coming from usually a top tier, whether it was a Booth or a Harvard or something of that nature. I was a 22-year-old kid coming from a public university with, just a Bachelor of Science in business. So for me, it really, really was the MBA, because one of the things that's amazing of a Fortune 500 company that invests in their people is you get that training. Probably every week for my first 2, if not 3 years, there was a training that I was going to that would either be a couple of hours or a full day. Every time when you got promoted, you went to assistant brand manager college, then brand manager college, and so forth and so on. And those were week-long all-day events that they flew everyone in from across the globe that was in your class and at your level. So for me, it really was that MBA, that kind of training. But I think where it was differed from just a classroom MBA was you combined that learning with the fact at the same time you were putting those principles to work the next day. You weren't just talking in theory and case studies, but you were owning a $20 million marketing budget the next day and doing something with it. So that's why, I do a lot of talks at college campuses, and especially when I talk to entrepreneur students, they want to go start a business right away at 22. And I'll encourage a lot of them of go find a place that you can get that training first, because me at 22 made a lot of mistakes. And it was a lot better to be making those mistakes on the budget of a several billion-dollar company than my tiny budget if I was an entrepreneur.
Right. Your error in that context is a rounding error versus an error with you as a 22-year-old, maybe startup founder could be fatal.
Yes, that's exactly it. And it's one of my first bosses, he said the great thing. He goes, just remember that we've created a system that has a safety belt on you. So drive the car as fast as you can. And we know that we've got the seatbelt. You'll be safe.
I love it. It's such good permission. It sounds like there's a really good culture there. Like when I think about, are you familiar with the service profit chain?
Loosely, but not intimately.
It sounds basically the premise is, so many people focus on the far end of revenue and growth, but these are outcomes of a whole series of events that walk back through the customer all the way back to employees. And so the premise is that when you invest in hiring, onboarding, training, developing, and you produce a good employee experience, that everything else falls out from there as a consequence. So focused there. It sounds like that was part of your experience there at P&G. I'm glad I asked. That's great. And it actually leads me into a pair of questions that I had prepared, which I'll ask the first. What's happening at the intersection of brand and technology from a startup standpoint? And then the follow-up is, what's happening there from, maybe a Fortune 500 or just generally a medium or large corporation standpoint? Like at that intersection of brand and technology where you kind of live and work and talk and advise and probably study and publish, et cetera. Talk about that intersection from kind of a startup point of view.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's really emerged is the fact that you have that prominence of branding and marketing coming into play. One of my good friends is a guy named Tim Kopp, who was the CMO for ExactTarget. And when Tim joined as the CMO there in 2007, he kind of had the premise that most of the B2B world wasn't practicing brand marketing. They had demand generation and they had traditional B2B marketing. But really this essence of bringing brand into the world of technology was something that not many people had done. And so that's something he really focused on. And I think he was a pioneer in a lot of ways, because fast forward, 10 years later, and I think actually some of the most exciting marketing that's going on and the most exciting brand work is actually being led from the B2B world instead of the B2C world. And ironically, the B2C world is becoming more about demand gen and performance marketing, which used to be the premise of the B2B back in the day. So you've got this blending where I think people are switching in between both of those worlds kind of interchangeably as a result.
Well, you kind of answered both questions in one there, and it sounds like there's just a little bit of a flip-flop there, which is really interesting. Why do you think that is the case? I had just a couple ideas that came to mind as you were talking about it, but why do you think that's the case, that B2C has, to your view, maybe historically been less demand gen based and moving in that direction, and startups and tech being less brand focused and started moving that way, or so B2B rather?
Yeah. So I think the B2C one is a really simple one, which is the rise of direct to consumer brands has changed the business that these guys have to be in. Because, you look at a P&G, a Unilever, and even a Ford Motor Company, we called them the biggest consumer marketing companies out there, but they actually didn't sell directly to the consumer. The auto guys had to go through their dealerships. The P&Gs and the Unilevers had to go through Walmart and Target. They never actually owned the end customer. And that's why you would hear in those worlds, they talked about a customer and a consumer. Walmart was the customer and the consumer was the person that was buying the product. So that's one change that's played out, I think, in a lot of cases. And then on the flip side, the reason for B2B is I'd say, infusion of technology into the lives of B2B has caused a pull that has taken place. And what I mean by that is, think back 2008, 2009, as the iPhone was just coming out. It used to be that, the enterprise and the IT guys, they dictate what technology you got issued. You get your BlackBerry, you get your laptop. And then you had all these people that had two phones. They had their work BlackBerry and they had their personal iPhone. And the iPhone started dragging in and, more and more into B2B. And what ended up happening is the consumer and customer experience that you had with an iPhone, with Facebook, with every piece of technology, you would then walk into the workplace and expect that same level of high-end experience. And that's really, I think, driven that behavior that in turn caused all the B2B marketers have to elevate their game in the same way.
I love it. It's a really interesting push and pull there. You mentioned earlier that some of the more exciting and interesting marketing is being done in the B2B space. What are a couple of things that come to mind there?
Yeah. So, one of the ones, and I know you have a favorite question around who's doing customer experience right. So one of the companies I love is Terminus. And Terminus is one of these great startups that's really redefining this world of account-based marketing. And what I love is it's a twofold thing. One, I just think account-based marketing as a whole is one of the more interesting trends we're seeing in the world of marketing today. And the orchestration and coordination of a great ABM campaign requires you to just be a great strategic marketer. It's about an art and science that combines. So one, I love the fact that they're helping give rise to that, but they're also practicing what they preach. And you look at the work that they're doing with Flip My Funnel, creating the community around that, the podcast that creates the content with it. All of those efforts together are just truly, truly top notch across the board.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great example. Sangram Vajre leads it as kind of the face and the personality and the podcast host, often a speaker as well, and really coming from a place of value and education and building a community around the concept or the problem of contemporary B2B marketing today, rather than pitching software. It's so funny the way one just naturally rolls out into the other. And we're both here. Several of my team members are both consumers of the stuff that they put out, and as well as being subscribers to the software as well. I love that you took it there. Anything else you want to share about like the large corporate standpoint? Like, what are some of the challenges that they're facing? I think the one big thing that I took note of already is that the market has changed on them, and that they are now direct to consumer as a consequence of, or more often than before. Obviously, they still use retail, but anything else going on for like someone that's in a large brand or a large company that should be on the radar?
Yeah. So one of my favorite pieces of content out there is something that was done by Stanford University, actually, that Aaron Levy, who's one of the founder of Box, he did a class along with another colleague that was called The Industrialist Dilemma. And you can go watch all the videos. They put all the content up online for it. And what I love about that whole premise is it plays off, obviously, the innovator dilemma, and talking about the struggle for a lot of the Fortune 500 today is that the very things that gave them their competitive advantage over the last few decades are now a liability for them. In a world of Six Sigma, you got your factories to be at this perfect balance line of profitability. And you had all of these other things that went to perfection. But when the business that you're in changes, what do you actually do with those historical things that once gave you an advantage? You take what's happened in the world of shaving. It wasn't that Gillette didn't see Dollar Shave Club coming. It was they couldn't go in and tell Walmart, hey, by the way, we're going to launch something that competes directly against you. So those relationships become a liability. And what do you do with it? And that's kind of at the heart of what I wrote about in Predicting the Turn, and the work I'm doing with the podcast is how can you, one, address that fact, realize it's happening, and then do something about it? How can you go practice and learn from this world of innovation, and then bring that learning back into your hallways? And for me, it's practicing this concept of market intelligence that gives you the ability to see the how and when the future of your industry is going to happen by being externally focused and learning from what's happening with venture and with startups and everything else across the board.
What are a couple ways that someone can, so it's one thing to see these trends and to identify them, recognize your own liabilities. How is like a 1,000 person or 10,000 or even 100,000 person organization? How do they kind of make that turn? Are they starting essentially doing startups inside the larger organization, giving them freedom to explore and learn in a practical way? Like, what have you seen or heard around that from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, there's dozens of models that you can look at, and not one is ever going to be the right thing. You need to do a little bit of all of them, but a few that I personally really love. So one is corporate venture capital. One of the reasons I love corporate VC is I think a lot of people try and get in corporate VC for the same reason a VC gets into it, which is the financial returns. That's actually the least valuable thing for a corporate VC. You need to do it. You need to make a good return on capital and everything else. But the amazing thing about a venture capitalist is every single day they have dozens of people walking into their doors and telling them where the future is headed. And a great investor is able to see all of those things, have their own thesis of where they think the world is headed, but combine that with breadth and depth and pattern recognition of, I'm hearing this, this, and this. I think that means something to my business. And a corporate VC is a great way to be able to do that, to bring that in, to learn from it, and not just look for deal flow and good investments, but actually use as market intelligence for your business. So that's one thing that I love, that I think a lot of, nearly every corporation should have an effort in that space. The second one is involvement in the startup community, because corporate VC, while super valuable, you only will catch a company at that moment that they're looking for investment. So you might limit yourself if you're only doing that. So that's why you need to get involved with a lot of different versions of startup engagement. And that startup engagement can be partnerships, it can be accelerators, it can be any of those elements. But the mistake most corporations make is they pick one version of startup engagement, and that doesn't give them enough breadth. You can't throw your name on a corporate accelerator and said, I'm seeing 10 startups, so I've done everything. You need to get out there and do a lot more. So I'm at least of the belief that great engagement in the startup world, and the way to predict that turn is you have to do everything that you can. And that means doing investment. That means doing partnership. That means looking at launching your own efforts. And that might even mean acquisition and finding companies that you can bring into your halls as well.
Love it. It just occurred to me as you said, predicting the turn again. For you, what is the turn?
Yeah. So the turn is the moment when business changes. So the analogy I play off of is if you play poker, the turn is that fourth card that comes out. And if you're in the game at the fourth card coming down, you think you have a chance to win. And the thing we're watching right now in the world of business is there's some people sitting around the table that don't realize they're actually playing a different game than they originally sat down with. And so the turn is that moment in business and in the game of business where things change, and you need to be anticipating what that change is going to be.
It's a great analogy. I'm glad I asked. So shifting it just a little bit, I've heard and observed that VCs are giving a higher multiple to companies with low churn rates and of course, high retention rates. And there are clear customer experience implications there. Is this something that you've observed? And are you doing any advising around what, smaller, younger companies can do out of the gate to be successful and get better multiples down the road?
Yeah. So, the game of multiples is always an interesting, evolving one in the world of venture, because it flows somewhat in line with the public markets, that as multiples change and different metrics matter more or less, you see that constant evolution. So what I always encourage companies is you need to pay attention to your metrics, be super focused on your metrics, but you should be doing everything about building a great business, not building a business based on what multiple you hope you're going to get, because we're not going to be in control of that. Next year, if the world of MarTech suddenly becomes unattractive on Wall Street, doesn't matter what you did with churn rates or anything else, you're going to see your metrics blow up. Just ask any of the poor ad tech companies that went public 3-4 years ago, how much they were out of their control in that. But with all of that, that's what our job as marketers is, to figure out how to make the best metrics possible for our business and to really be driving to put ourselves in the driver's seat. Because the single biggest thing that will influence, later stage investment, valuations, or anything else is not needing venture capital. If you don't need the money because you've created a business that has great metrics and maybe even has hit profitability because of those great metrics, if you don't need the money, everyone's going to want to give you the money. Right. And that's our job, to kind of put yourself in those controls. So that's exactly what I've been doing. You mentioned the title strategic consultant. The work I've been doing since leaving WPP and Rockfish is what I call being a strategic marketing coach. So I'm not doing consulting in it. What I'm doing is executive coaching in terms of how can marketers position themselves the best way within an organization, how to mentor and coach and help you get there faster. Because marketing is a thing that anybody can figure it out. It's not something that requires a PhD, but it requires your 10,000 hours of practice. And what I'm trying to help marketers do is get their 10,000 hours of practice a little bit quicker by stealing some of the hours that I've had at the plate.
Love it. Since I have you here, and since I am a marketer and we have a lot of marketers listening as well, what are one or two or three common things that you see in that coaching? Opportunities for growth or common errors or whatever? Like what are a couple things that you tend to speak to frequently in these engagements?
Yeah. So I think the most common thing is what starts with talent. And it's amazing how often it comes down to that great marketers hire other great marketers. And where I've seen marketing organizations that have not been realizing their potential is generally where the marketing leader was, if they were hiring below their level. And what I mean by that was they were maybe not comfortable with something. And instead of hiring an A talent that would show how their weakness and expose their weakness, they hired a B or a C player that was maybe at parity with their weakness. And I don't think anybody does it maliciously or intentionally, but almost every single time I've seen a weakness in a marketing team, it comes down to that. And on the flip side, those organizations that are great is when a marketer realizes you can't do everything. And a great marketer is probably only actually going to be great in 2 or 3 areas at best and weak in a lot more than that. And the great marketing teams are the ones where the marketing leader is comfortable enough with their own skin that they say, I am great at this, and I'm going to hire somebody better than me in this, and this area. And what ends up happening is the entire team ends up elevating in a great place. So that in pretty much every company I work with, the ones that aren't hitting on all cylinders, that is the common cause in 98% of the situations. So I always start with that one. The similar one to that is, I think, a fear of thinking you have to build everything yourself. There is a real value of tapping into expertise externally and using that to your advantage, because you get credit for success. You don't get credit for doing the work yourself. But I think a lot of marketers, we feel like we have to get credit for doing the work ourselves. So if you can go pull in a demand gen agency to help you for 4 or 5 months, that get your foundation built, get your marketing tech in a great place, do it. Take advantage of it. Don't spend the time to hire that person, bring them on, onboard them, just go off and do it. And that's something that I think we're afraid at sometimes to do, but we don't have time as a startup. Your most valuable thing is executing quickly. So bring in experts to help you. Hire great things when you can, but bring in partners to help you get things done faster as well. And then I think the final thing that marketers kind of make a mistake is in not building up enough credibility with their peers and other functions. They put their head down and say, I have XYZ to accomplish in marketing, and I'm going to go off and go do it. But what you actually first need to do is figure out, where can marketing help your peers across the organization to do their job even better? So sit down with your peer over in sales, with your CEO, with customer service, go across that board, and how can you help them? Because if you have that give first mentality, that's going to pay maximum dividends for you later on down the road.
Yeah, such great advice there. All 3 of those were fantastic. That last one is really something I'm trying to explore here on the show, because customer experience is delivered in part by all the people you mentioned. And the customer looks different at different points based on what seat you're in the organization. And so the more holistic view you can give yourself as a marketer, and the more you can share your own understanding and point of view with other people at other touch points, I think the better off we're all going to be. The other interesting thing there too is bridging 1 and 2 together, the ability to hire that outside resource or that outside talent or that outside service is going to be much easier when you have someone who is more expert in that topic area. You know, to your point of like hiring to complement your weaknesses as opposed to, you know, hiring poorly to protect your strengths or protect your ego or, you know, all those other things that we're not consciously doing, but we're doing. You're going to be able to probably contract and negotiate and evaluate that work and that partnership with a third party more effectively if you have someone who's more expert in that topic area.
Yep, without doubt.
So at BombBomb here, we are bootstrapped. You know, we took some friends and family money early on. We've been in and out of a couple debt deals, but you know, pretty much some of the primary owners of the company are in the business every single day working here. Talk a little bit for people that are at a point, you know, because we've looked at obviously all the opportunities. Our CEO's phone rings regularly and gets emails unsolicited and solicited about opportunities. Talk about kind of the pros and cons and the various like big buckets for someone that isn't super familiar with ways to fund an operation and get a business to a healthy point. What are some pros and cons of different ways to go?
Yeah, so I think it really does depend on the company, what your goals are and what you're looking to accomplish. The only reason to ever look at funding, and whether it's funding's venture capital, friends and family, debt rounds, any of the different options out there, funding should be about helping you accomplish milestones. And that needs to be the goal of any time you ever take money. Because, you know, taking money, it's like getting a mortgage on your house. And we never go brag about how big of a mortgage we got when we purchase a house. Yet a lot of times we go raise money and we want to go brag about how much money we raised. And that's the wrong thing to be doing. So whenever you approach any sort of funding, it should be, does this help me do a milestone quicker, faster, better, etc. And then know that any of those models of funding will all come with different things that they dictate from you. You know, if you take a line of credit or venture debt, well, that's something that has to be steadily repaid. And so you better have a consistent flow of cash that's coming in to be able to do that. Because if it takes you a little bit extra to get your product out or something else, well, you still got to start paying back the interest on that debt, whether you like it or not. On the flip side, you look at venture capital, it's a little bit more patient, but it's only patient for so long because venture funds have to be, you know, usually they're raising a 10-year venture fund. So they need you to repay that at some point as well. And there will be pressures that come into that, et cetera. So with all of them, it's just being cognizant, what do you want to do as your business? And then what are the things that will happen with those different sources based on your goals, what's going to be the best way to go off and to do it. The final thing I'll say on that is that realize that all money isn't created equal either. I think the biggest mistake I see from startups in a lot of cases is when they do make the decision to go raise money. And when I say raise, I mean usually venture capital or private equity. They are optimizing based on valuations. And optimizing on valuation is the exact wrong thing to do. What you should be doing is optimizing about the people that will be around the table and who will help you be successful to do that. So find the smartest people you can and raise money from them, because hopefully what you want is those that can help you do your business better.
Such good advice. I absolutely love what you offered there. The money is a means to an end. You need to be clear on the end. And in this case, it's achieving another milestone or two. And I would go out on a limb to say, because I've not been in that conversation before, but I would go out on a limb to say your clarity on the answers to those questions of what are you trying to get done here are going to be questions you're going to need to answer anyway. So you should be clear on that regardless. And then the final offering there is that it's all about relationships and fit. I would say that a culture match is probably critical there. Like, again, more important than the multiple is the kind of the culture match. Who's there? What additional intangible value are you going to get out of it besides just the financial or transactional aspect of it?
Exactly.
Good. And so I'll just use that to roll right into to the question I always like to ask here as we wrap up, because relationships are our number one core value. Can you thank or mention someone who's had a positive impact on your life or your career, and give a mention to a company that you think is doing customer experience and in this case, branding? I might have just been redundant there, doing that really well.
Yeah. So the first one I'd kind of say from a thank you standpoint and somebody that's been a big impact is a woman named Wendy Lee. Wendy she was on the board of directors or is on the board of directors for Techstars. But we actually met when she was the CEO of Get Satisfaction, which was a great company in the customer experience space back late 2000s. And when I was thinking about leaving P&G, Wendy was one of the people that I first sat down with and said, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's what I want to accomplish. And she gave me amazing advice that I've given to countless people after me, which was, think about where you want to go in life and go 1 degree closer every time you make a move. And she said, every time I've seen somebody fall on their face, it's because they're trying to jump too many degrees over. And that's very tough to do. And so that's been amazing advice for me. And it's something that I've shared a lot. And I've seen Wendy share a lot because she then, after Get Satisfaction, actually came here to Cincinnati for the last few years to be our CEO for Centrifuge, a great organization that we had here in town that's doing really kind of fun things, making impact. And then, to your question about who's doing it right, I'll actually bring back the example I shared earlier, which is I do think Terminus is one that if you haven't studied it as a B2B marketer and as a customer experience professional, it's one you need to dive into. And the reason I think it's interesting is there's a mantra, especially with so much of Silicon Valley being a driver of the startup world, that you hear you need the hacker, the hustler, and the designer as that holy trinity for the startup world. And what was fascinating with Terminus is that Sangram was one of the co-founders as the chief marketing officer. And having a marketer as that founding team member, especially for a company that was going to be selling to marketers, you saw from day one, they built the customer into the heart and soul of what they were doing. And there's so much inspiration of how can you do that from day one that just will pay dividends for a long, long time.
It's outstanding. I really love that you doubled down on that and look forward to sharing that feedback with him too. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Can you give people a few ways if anyone wants to go deeper, learn more about the various projects that you're involved in, check out the podcast, check out the book? What are some ways that people can follow up with you?
Yeah, so a few different ways. One is pretty much any social thing you can think of. I'm at Dave Knox. So Twitter, LinkedIn, go down the list all there. So just at Dave Knox, all one word. And then predictingtheturn.com is my website that you can find all kinds of information, whether it's about a link to the book, to my podcast, to the work I do actually as a professional speaker with conferences and corporates, or just what I'm doing from an executive marketing coaching area. So any of those are a great place, and always happy to take an email at dave@predictingtheturn.com.
Excellent. I hope people take you up on that. Really, really great advice. You've seen a lot of stuff. You obviously have a very intelligent, informed perspective. And I love that you continue to explore it through the podcast medium as well. Hey, if you want to subscribe to Predicting the Turn or to the Customer Experience Podcast, you can find either of them in Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and in all the other spots where you would normally listen to a podcast. Thanks so much for this episode. Thank you, Dave, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing with BombBomb as well.
I agree with Dave. Terminus is an awesome company, and they are modeling great behavior in terms of community building. Hey, if you enjoyed this conversation on the CX series of the B2B Growth Show, check out the Customer Experience Podcast. You can learn more about it by searching the Customer Experience Podcast in iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Play or Google Podcasts. Or you can go to BombBomb.com/podcast. That's the word bomb twice, BOMB.com/podcast. Thanks for listening.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.